So has Jed officially shaken Harbaugh now?
I think it's fair to say, yeah. I mean, I don't. It was probably the biggest story in the NFL his last year. I just think going back and forth, right? Everything that was going on. I'll never forget. I was at the game, I'm pretty sure, the night that he got fired, mutually departed, and they put out the press release, remember, right before Harbaugh talked.
Mm-hmm.
And then the next couple years, I'll never forget going to I think you were there too, a Tom Sula training camp practice. Remember when Reggie Bush got the practice off? And it was like, I'm not sure what's going on here. This does not look like an NFL operation. And then the Chip Kelly year with the defense and just how ugly it got. And clearly we said from the jump, how did you Trent Baalke, who, while him and Harbaugh butted heads, Harbaugh was his style of coach. And then the Chip thing couldn't have been any more of a disaster. And I'll give Jed credit on this because he clearly loved Trent Baalke as a human being. And I think one thing we see pretty consistently is that general managers in all sports, but the NFL is unique because in basketball, Joe Lacob's going to think yeah, I know what we do. We run this type of offense. We run three-pointers. He's going to feel like he's got a pretty good idea what's expected of the players. In baseball, for the most part, it's yeah, this guy can't hit the slider. It's relatively basic. There's no chance Jed York has any clue what coach stuff's going on because I worked in the NFL and half the play, I got no clue. It's a really complicated thing. But on a basic level, you can talk to the general manager as listen, we got to work on this guy. Our coach is letting him down. It's easy for the general manager to have talks with the owner. Plus, for the most part, while the coach is on the field, they're watching the game with the guy. It's a very unique setup that way. Most general managers in the NBA don't watch games with the owner, right? In baseball, most GMs just watch games by themselves in that little room. It feels like that every baseball park has. It always
doesn't feel like baseball owners attend games mostly.
Yeah, that too. I never see them. And in football,
there's a lot of games.
That relationship gets very, very close. And Jed was probably viewed Trent Baalke as a friend as much as an employee. And when he fired them both, it was the healthiest reset for the organization. Because it wouldn't have been shocking, and there was some talk could Chip be a one and done, and Trent's going to get his fourth coach in 7 years, and he just fired them all. And listen, it wasn't a direct path to Kyle. They wanted Josh, but it ultimately led here. And this one, you had to, he was on the list, the number 2 guy on the list. Remember, Elway interviewed Kyle and didn't want him. Went Vance Joseph over Kyle Shanahan. So you got to give Jed credit on this hire. He pivoted to the right guy. And I think at the time, it was hard with a straight face to say Josh wasn't a better candidate than Kyle, right? He had been a previous head coach. He had written the Dan Pompei article or whatever about changing his life and reading positive things. And, I don't even, do you think Josh is fluff on that? I do think he's serious, right? If you're a high level guy, you try to improve. Sure. He feels like a more well-rounded guy. But what are the chances, and I mean, this is a complete hypothetical, that we would feel as good as Josh McDaniels as we do as Kyle Shanahan 3 years into this
Very
marriage?
Low.
I think it's borderline, probably 0.
Because I don't know that we could feel better about Kyle. I mean, that's part of the equation, right? And I think you could argue that Jed shook the Harbaugh thing when the Niners were 8-0. You could argue the Super Bowl. I think what's significant about the extension is that Mariucci was the last coach extended, but Jed has never signed a coach to an extension. That was 5-6 years, even more. Mariucci's last year was, 2002? Jed took over 2008. So
yeah,
he's never extended a coach. And I think you nailed it. The Harbaugh
Jed's like the Theo Epstein of owners' kids, becomes the managing partner at 29.
Well, John, he's younger than Kyle Shanahan by 3 or 4 months. He's 40. He just turned 40. Kyle turns 41 in December.
Jed did? I didn't know that.
Yeah, so part of this is he gets to learn and evolve. And I think the Tom Sula hire, as crazy as it was this is going to sound, it's a little understandable when you factor not only the Harbaugh
he was
thing,
1-0.
He was 1-0, best winning percentage ever. The Harbaugh thing wasn't just Harbaugh. You nailed it. It was also Baalke. It was Harbaugh versus the organization, but there was also Harbaugh versus Baalke, and then Where did Balky fall into this whole thing, right? And it's just such a disaster.
Clearly, Balky the whole time had Jed on his side where Jim did not. Right.
It's such a disaster that they go, let's just look. And this happens. You usually go polar opposite from whatever you just had. So let's take a guy that was really hard to work with, but he was so successful we couldn't really tell people how hard he was to work with. Joe Staley, one of the pillars of our franchise, couldn't have been happier that Jim was gone, right? Joe had a rough few years here coming up after Jim gets fired in terms of leadership. Let's just go with a guy that we know everyone gets along with him. And we'll just surround, we got the analytics. We'll surround him with some good coaches. And it turned out maybe it was a little harder to hire coaches for him. And I get where they were going with it, but it was...
Remember he tried to hire Lane Kiffin? You remember that?
Yeah, it was bad. So they said, you know what? Disaster. Let's cut our losses and let's try again. Okay, what do we do now? Well, let's hire this guy. He's one of the hot names in the game. And it went, you look back on Chip here, right? It went really well that first year in Philly. And then the second year, he won 10 games back-to-back years. Forget about the 6-win season. Let's go get Chip Kelly. Now, maybe ignoring that he had some of the same issues in Philly that Harbaugh had in San Francisco, right? There was this interpersonal thing. But whatever. Let's go throw a bunch of money at Chip Kelly. So they threw a bunch of money at Chip Kelly. And they realized really quickly this is bad. I don't mean to do a full recap here, but here's where they get credit again. You don't get credit for being wrong, but you do get credit when you're wrong, realizing you're wrong, and just putting your money where your mouth is. Like, okay, get rid of that. And then, all right, now what do we do now? Because the game has changed, and we've got some of these coaches. The coaches want control. All right, maybe we'll try and get a little all-star team together. We'll get a sweet GM and a sweet head coach, and we'll pair them. But
wouldn't you say the one thing you learn that's basically impossible unless a package deal is coming? Like, it's because a lot of these assistant coaches are not just going to have like Haberman and Middlekauff. Like, the offensive coordinator is not going to be like, my best friend, assistant GM Ravens, bring him. That never happens. It's always like, yeah, I got to interview this Gutekunst guy, or I know this what's the dude name? George Patton the 7th in Minnesota. Like, the same names. Like, let's just talk to these guys. Yeah, you're just not going to know them.
Yeah.
Like, that was always the easiest part about Josh. Like, Josh, it's like, he'll just bring one of New England's minions. You're like, I hope. What if he doesn't like any of them? You never know. That's why it's pretty rare for, like, Andy and Veach, right? Or the relation. I would say that's those guys had known Andy. Veach was his assistant 15 years ago. That's an outlier relationship. I would say the relationship everyone hopes for is like Pete and John didn't know each other, best friends now. That's what like everyone's looking for. Can we just, our head coach, who's just gonna have the juice, hire his John Schneider, and then that guy becomes sweet, and then we just have like this paradise. That never happened. Like, hell, the Raiders are hoping like Mayock, Gruden. I don't know. We'll see.
Yeah.
Right? It's just, there's still so much unknown with a lot of these, like Sean McVay and Les Snead. Is Les Snead coming down the home stretch? You never know. It's difficult. Bill O'Brien can't meet a human being that he wants to work with. Not a human being. He can't find one. He literally hired his own guy and fired him a year later. So the relationship, I think that relationship is probably the hardest thing to find in the NFL. Like, it's way easier to find coaches that like quarterbacks or whatever. They're like, oh, we'll hire this coach. He'll bring this quarterback with him, or he likes this guy in the draft. I'd say the GM coach relationship harder to find in football than probably the other couple sports.
Yeah. But part of it is then when you find it, right? We've talked a lot about showing your true colors in failure, but there's also this element of kind of maintaining an even keel through success. And the Niners, they had a lot of success, and just a lot of things went haywire. There were power struggles. There were probably differences of opinion and personality match from the beginning, but they were winning. And so it just, when you're winning, all that stuff gets pushed to the back. My guess is that Jed recognized in the first 2 years of Kyle Shanahan that he would probably be extending Kyle at some point, that he thought this is something, we got something good here. Then you go to the Super Bowl and it becomes an easy one, right? And you said this yesterday when we talked about it. If they don't go to the Super Bowl, Is he getting an extension right now? Well, I don't know. If they go to the NFC Championship game, maybe he still would have gotten an extension based on being paid less than Zach Taylor. But the point is, my guess is that Jed York in the first 2 years realized, even though they weren't winning a lot of games, we got something here that's different than everything we've had before, even though we didn't go 13-3 in year one like we did with Jim. So, yeah, I guess everyone could have gone today, you know what, let's extend Kyle Shanahan. If you asked everybody, should you do it or should you not, you'd go, okay, let's just do it. But my guess is Jed knew much earlier than today or yesterday or the draft this year.
I would agree. I think
that's partly just based on everything he's been through.
I think the one thing that's really clear right now is that how many coaches in the NFL truly have more power when they walk in the door. Because I would say beside the one who's in New England, you could make an argument Kyle is right up there for the number 2 guy. And to me, when you pay... Yeah, because Andy lets Veach pick the players. Like, there isn't...
But he would have the power, right, to change that.
Yeah, I get... But my point is, like, Kyle is legitimately taking a huge part of it. Like, Kyle is really active. Like, he's the guy picking the players. I mean, John plays a huge role in it, but Kyle's the decision maker. They do have a pretty
good-sized front office, though, in terms of Peters and Mayhew, and right, they've got a lot of guys in that.
That's where I think you could argue, because Kyle is somewhat younger, that you probably couldn't have a more ideal, like John Lynch. There's an insecurity, I think, with just a quote-unquote scout or a personnel man just naturally. You're not making anywhere close to as much money. And that's what I think a big issue with Trent Baalke is. You're like, well, this guy's the former player. He's the famous one, but everyone kind of knows my name. But I'm talking. There's no insecurity with John. You could make the case that John Lynch, like, this wouldn't work as smoothly with just Gutekunst, or whoever. Even though that guy might be
Shanahan and Elway probably wouldn't have been a great match, right?
I don't think so. I don't think so at all. Maybe Elway needs a guy, and I think this speaks to the one thing with Kubiak. He was older. He was like, John, do whatever you want. Like, he wasn't into any of that. And now Fangio is just so happy to be head coach. You pick the players. I'll just coach the team. There is an element of Kyle where, yeah, I don't think it would have worked, guy. I don't think so at all. And I bet John Schneider would tell you, I think one of the reasons why I was able to gain so much power, because ultimately Pete truly just wants to coach the team. He's been doing this for so long. He's got nothing as much. He doesn't have as much to prove. It's really what makes Belichick such a machine. Like, how do you care this much still? But he does. And I think Saban's the same way. And I mean, part of it, clearly it's easier to extend them when you've just seen, like Jed's seen this guy interact with people.
I just think the simplest way to look at, what would you say Jed's, if we were to make a few bullet points to try and describe Jed's tenure, certainly it's had really high highs, there have been some low lows, but I'd say one of his characteristics to this point through 12 years is he is willing to spend the money to do whatever it is that he thinks is the right thing to do. And so they thought it was Chip. Let's make it Chip. It's not Chip. Okay, let's spend the money on the next guy. Let's spend the money on the extension. And I mean, isn't that one of the most basic things you want in an owner? You're just going to make some wrong decisions. You hope you learn from them. But if you are not able to chase mistakes with money, then it's really going to be hard to compete.
Yeah,
because everyone is going to make mistakes.
I think some people would counter you. Well, he's got unlimited cash now with the stadium. And I would counter them going, well, not every owner would be willing to spend their unlimited cash. And we see it all over pro sports. So you're right. To me, his checkbook, whether players, coaches, anything that any of them need. I mean, we go out to some of these practices and we see the weirdest shit of like this thing you got to run up and these.
Oh, the hill, yeah.
Well, and just like this wood thing that you got to like use for rehab. And that to me is low amount of expenses for them. But to me, when you're paying a head coach, player money. I mean, how many players on the 49ers, if we Googled it, are making more than probably 10.5 or whatever, Kyle? Not that many, right? He makes more than Rich Sherman now. So you just...
But I think it's also the staff, right? It's like, because you remember when the Niners put their staff together, it's like, so you got Peters and you got Mayhew. Then wait, what's Lynch? You got Lynch? Okay, this is a pretty big front office, right? Like it is in terms of, they have two VPs of player personnel. They just, okay, Kyle, this is what you need? Cool. We're going to spend the money on it.
To me, I'm fascinated to know.
Just make sure you don't
And
pull the team off the field on season ticket holder day, please.